We are live this morning on Standing for Truth. I've got a very exciting debate today between two men who need no introduction. You guys all know Dr. Ken Hovind. He's been on here many times for interviews and debates. Also, Jim Majors as well. He's no stranger to debates. So today we're debating what's the evidence for biblical creation. I've got Nephilim Free here. I want to thank him. He's going to be moderating this debate. So I'm going to hand it over to him for just a brief introduction, and he's going to go over the format real quick. Neff, it's all yours, man.
Okay, so good morning, gentlemen. We're going to have 8-minute openings, 5-minute rebuttals, and 25-minute discussion, and 4-minute closings. So Jim's going first. They flipped a coin, and Dr. Hovind won the flip, and he decided Jim goes first. So Jim, your 8-minute opening statement. Let me start my timer. 1 second. For such a little application, it starts awfully slow. Okay, there it is. Okay, Jim, when you start speaking, 8 minutes.
Sorry, coffee first. First of all, I'd like to thank Kent for coming to this debate and discussing this very important issue. The book of Genesis, which accounts the biblical creation, it's been traditionally attributed to Moses and narrates the exodus of Israel from Egypt and is traditionally dated around 1400 BCE. The vast majority of modern scholars accept that the accounts in Genesis are not in their original form, but rather they are a later composition. In fact, the Genesis that we know today was formed as late as around 400 BC, which was BCE. My apologies, which is right after the exile of Israel. But it's important before examining these accounts of creation in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. I believe that we need to first discuss another creation myth. It's a Babylonian epic, an epic that's known by Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish means "when on high," and it's the first words of the text. I believe the text dates back to 7th century, and we have references to these gods dating back to the 18th century. The story in the Enuma Elish begins before the formation of heaven and earth. Nothing existed except what they except in their creation myth, the primeval freshwater existed, and it's personified by a god named Apsu, a male god named Apsu. There also existed a primeval saltwater deity, a saltwater ocean deity named Tiamat, a female goddess. I'll be reading in part from a translation of the Enuma Elish, and the story begins. When on high, the heaven had not been named, firm ground below had not been called by name, not but primordial Apsu, their begetter, and Mumu Tiamat, she who bore them all. Okay, so, and it goes on to say, when no gods whatever had been brought into being, uncalled by name, their destinies undetermined, then it was that the gods were formed within them. But these new creations were annoying, apparently, to these early primeval gods. The Enuma Elish says that the divine brothers banded together and that they were disturbing Tiamat as they surged back and forth. And it troubled the mood of Tiamat by their what they call the hilarity in the abode of heaven. And so Apsu opens his mouth and says to Tiamat, he says, "Their ways are verily loathsome unto me. By day I find no relief, nor repose by night. I will destroy, I will wreck their ways, that quiet may be restored. Let us have rest." So these creations are very much disturbing them, and so he has a plan to kill them. Tiamat answers him, kind of trying to counsel him, and says, "Do destroy, my father, the mutinous ways. Then you will have relief by day and rest by night." And Apsu heard this, and his face grew radiant because of the evil he planned against the gods, his sons, the sons of God. So we see here that their decision to kill their creation is due to the ruckus they were causing, for a lack of a better term. But his plan's ruined by another god named Ea, spelled E-A. It's a god, the god of earth and water, and he kills Apsu, and which totally ticks off Tiamat. So she gathers up an army and sets out to attack the gods. The gods, who were concerned for their safety, with rightly so, they appoint Marduk, who's another deity, as their leader, and he leads them into war, but only after he sets certain conditions. In the Enumalish, he says, "Creator of the gods, destiny of the great gods, if I indeed, as your avenger, and to vanquish Tiamat and save your lives, set up the assembly, proclaim supreme my destiny." So he wants to be notified as the supreme god. He wants to be the top dog. Up until then, he was just a city god, a god of the city. Let my word instead of you determine the fates. Unalterable shall be what I may bring into being. Neither recall nor change shall be the command of my lips. And eventually, Marduk brings down the mighty Tiamat in battle, and he stands on her carcass. Now, what's said next is very interesting. So far, you may have recognized some other parallels to the creation accounts in Genesis already, and to other creation accounts. But listen closely to this. He split her like a shellfish into two parts. Half of her he set up and sealed it as sky, pulled down the bar and posted guards. He bade them to allow not her waters to escape. So Marduk is using the clamshell shape of half of Tiamat's carcass to hold back the waters as a firmament. And the holes that were gained in battle are used as an early explanation for rainfall. They were the leaks, so to speak, in the firmament. Now the other half of Tiamat is the land, which holds down the waters which reside below. Sound familiar? Then comes the creation of the heavens and the heavenly bodies. The Enumalish reads, "He constructed stations for the great gods." The heavenly bodies were understood early as stations for the great gods. They determined the year by designating the zones, and he set up 3 constellations for each of the 12 months. Interesting. That's what we have today. The moon he caused to shine, the night to him entrusting. Interesting. Now, looking at Genesis, like any other myth, it was written by ancient authors from an ancient time using an ancient understanding of life, our origins, and the cosmos. In this post-exilic time, the identity of Israel was suffering. They no longer had the temple to unite the Israelites, and they were struggling to do just that, to unite their society. And we all have ways of connecting with our own society and attempting to understand the world that we live in. The need to understand these core elements of our existence are as old as time, and it's evident in the multitude of religious texts dating back tens of thousands of years, some of them. People just have a longing to understand where we come from and why we're here. But creating and maintaining an identity is essential to the survival of a civilization, even more so when the culture encounters the attempted destruction of their identity, like the Israelites. And in trying to create an identity, the author of Genesis uses Adam as a literary device to explain and account for their turmoil. Just a brief outline. You have the creation, you have the fall of man, and then you have the exile from the garden, and that's something that's very much repeated. The promised land, we see parallels of that, and Eden. How everything's just going to be perfect and everything's going to be okay. If you just do this.
1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute. Thank you. Okay, so just real quick, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, 2. And the earth was formless and void. So this formless void is transformed by God over 6 days, according to Kent, into an earth that is ordered and filled. 6 literal days, and 7 times God saw that his creations were good. Each day is a day. It can be interpreted as a certain extended period of time, but since Kent believes that they are literal days, and I appreciate that. That honesty. I'm not going to get into that much further. And again, I think that's another opening statement. So I'm going to go ahead and concede the rest of my time to the opening discussion, or to the open discussion. Sorry.
Okay then. So resetting the timer for Dr. Hovind, 8 minutes when you begin speaking. So.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate that. Looks like I won already because you didn't discuss the biblical creation account. You claimed it was the Babylonian one, and I would disagree. It's not. So I think by default, I already won. We're here to discuss, is there evidence for biblical creation? Evidence is an interesting word. The available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true. In law, the rules of evidence govern the types of evidence that are admissible. There are 15 different types of evidence, and I'll cover that in just a minute. The Bible clearly teaches, in the beginning, God created the heaven, and heaven is singular, and the earth. So that's what it claims, and it claims in Exodus 20 in the Ten Commandments, in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. So here we have a claim by a book claiming that God created the heaven. And we have a claim by Jesus that he's the one who created the heaven, because Jesus is God Almighty in the flesh. He said, have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? Matthew 19:4, same thing in Mark 10:6. That was the beginning of the creation. The Bible clearly teaches that man brought death into the world, whereas evolution teaches death brought man into the world, a complete polar opposite. By man came death, in Adam all die. So the Bible is clearly claiming the creation account was perfect, it was wonderful, it was lovely, and man messed it up. And the Bible clearly teaches that Adam was the first man, and his wife Eve was the mother of all living. Everybody came from Eve, and Adam was 130 when his son was born, and the dates are all given in Genesis chapter 5, and you can make a chart like I've done and use in all my seminars. The Bible clearly teaches the world was created about 4000 BC, plus or minus maybe 50 years for adjustments in chronology, but that's what it teaches, okay, about 6,000 years ago. Textbook says the earth is billions of years old. Somebody's clearly wrong. So Jesus claimed the creation of Adam was the beginning, which means he was lying, or he didn't understand science, or maybe he was right. And there are those who claim maybe the days are periods of time. Like you mentioned, I do not believe that. There are two verses, Psalm 90 and 2 Peter 3, that say a day is like 1,000 years. That was called the day-age theory, introduced in 1820. I do not believe that. It doesn't work for all sorts of reasons. We can bring it up during rebuttal if you'd like. But the grass and trees, according to the Bible account, were made on day 3, and the sun made on day 4. Well, then the trees are going to die if those days are 1,000 years each. So no, it's clearly a literal 24-hour day creation. That's what it says, and I go through all that in my seminar. Okay, let me skip this for sake of time to get into, the Bible warns us that there would be scoffers in the last days who would be willingly ignorant of the creation. They don't understand what was that creation like. They don't understand the flood that overflowed the world, and they sure don't understand the coming judgment of God, the creation, the flood, and the coming judgment of God. Okay, if you find an arrowhead laying in a pile of gravel, what do you conclude? Where's the evidence? Was this man-made, or is this naturally occurring? Well, it's made of natural components like rock, but what kind of evidence would show us that somebody created this? Can we look at the biblical creation account? Well, there's analogical evidence, the kind you don't use in court. There's anecdotal evidence, where you make an analogy with something else. There's character reference evidence. There's circumstantial evidence. There's demonstrative evidence. There's digital evidence. Someone left behind a recording or something like that. I think there's digital evidence. I don't know if you've studied the Bible codes, but they're pretty fascinating. Just Google Bible code. There's a lot on the internet, pro and con. Many books have been written on the topic of the signature of God written in the Bible codes. Not only is the Bible written in Hebrew, Old Testament, you can skip certain letters and get another code. Every 13 letters in Deuteronomy chapter 10 gives the phrase, in the bitter sea of Auschwitz. If you skip and go every 22 letters, it gives the name Hitler. They find all kinds of this. You can study this forever. The biblical codes. Proverbs says it's the glory of God to reveal a thing, or to conceal a thing. For instance, in Deuteronomy 10, Hitler is found at every 22 letter intervals in the Hebrew. Auschwitz is found going backwards at every 13 letters, and you can study all that on yourself. But there are many folks who've studied this and say, the secrets of the Torah are revealed in the skipping of the letters. There's a code written within the code. Rips explained that each code is a case of adding every fourth letter to form a word. Read the code. Every fourth letter says read the code. So this is a code written within the code. I think the Bible has thousands of those. My computer messed up, but the circles are not in the right spot. But in the book of Genesis, every 49 letters says Torah, going one direction. Exodus says Torah every 49 letters. Numbers says Torah every 49 letters going the other direction. And Deuteronomy has the word Torah every 49 letters going the other direction. And the book of Leviticus, the middle of those 5 books, has the word God in Hebrew. So Genesis, Exodus point one way toward God. Numbers, Deuteronomy point the other way toward God. Just the Bible codes. I think that would be digital evidence that possibly somebody wrote this who's way beyond our intelligence. I don't think you could find a human today that could write a book. You couldn't get a computer to write a book like that. There is direct evidence for the creation. There's documentary evidence. We have a document. It says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So the Bible, it would be documentary evidence. Now, whether it's true or not is a different story. But here we have a Bible claiming that God did it. There's forensic evidence. This is what you guys would count as your fossil evidence. I point out no fossil counts in an honest court of law for any evidence for evolution. All you know is the creature died. You don't know it had any children. You sure couldn't prove it had children that lived, and you certainly couldn't prove it had children that lived that were different. No animal today produces any other kind of animal. There is no forensic evidence for any animal changing to anything else. The Bible says they will always bring forth after their kind. I think the forensic evidence is clearly in favor of the Bible being true. That's all any farmer in the planet has ever observed in human history. Cows produce cows, dogs produce dogs, without exception. There is hearsay evidence. There is physical evidence. I think if you find an arrowhead, you would say, wow, this is physical evidence that somebody made this. Now, who made it? Don't know. When did he make it? I don't know. We can study that out. But somebody made it. That's obvious. There's prima facie evidence. There is statistical evidence. There is testimonial evidence. There's many different kinds of evidence. I would point out, Jim, that I think the overwhelming evidence is that the creation account, even though other accounts were written first, like the Gilgamesh epic, not Gilgamesh, but the Babylonian story, they may have been written first, but Moses didn't rely on those at all. Moses got direct inspiration from God. You've not demonstrated that he copied those. If there are similarities between Moses' account and Babylonian account, it could be because the sons of Noah were spreading this story to their children and grandchildren. And of course, there are going to be similarities, maybe a little perverting with time. But sure, there are similarities in the creation stories. We've got a boot camp coming up next month. Come on down, June 14, 15, 16, where people will be speaking about that very topic. Paul Abramson speaking on the 300 plus flood legends that have been found around the world. Of course, there would be flood legends. People would talk about that for a long time after the real flood in the days of Noah. So I don't think you've demonstrated that Moses copied from the Babylonian one. It could be that the Babylonian one is a perversion of the original story, and Moses got it exactly dead center right, inspired by God, probably from eyewitness accounts that he collected. He was going to be Pharaoh of Egypt, had access to the best library in the world. He probably had the original accounts that these all got twisted from. I think you've got it backwards, claiming he copied from Babylon. I think Babylon's a perversion of the real truth. Thank you so much.
All right, that concludes Dr. Hovind's opening statement. Jim, you're going to have your 5-minute rebuttal, and Dr. Hovind has his 5-minute rebuttal. So, Jim, when you begin speaking, you have 5 minutes to rebut what Dr. Hovind has said.
Jim's on mute. Jim, if you just want to unmute yourself there. Sorry, man.
Sorry about that. Okay, thank you so much, Kent.
That's okay.
Okay, I agree with Kent that cows do not produce cows, or cows produce cows and dogs produce dogs. You don't see a non-cow coming from a cow, and you don't see a non-dog coming from a dog. And I agree 100%, and that is not what science claims, but I'm not debating evolution today. We're debating whether or not the biblical creation account is true, whether or not there's evidence for that. And I still argue that there's not. Kent mentioned for a moment that there was prima facie evidence, or maybe he was just saying that was the type of evidence. I'm not sure whether he was claiming or not there's prima facie evidence for the biblical creation, but I'd be interested in hearing it if he does believe that. By Kent saying that, Moses didn't copy from Babylonian and everything like that, sure. That's a good possibility, because the things that he posts that he's writing in there, the things that are written in the creation account are something that's congruent with Bronze Age cosmology, with the firmament and things like that. It was an ancient understanding of how the world worked. So no, maybe he didn't copy from that, but the fact that it was written before that, Moses dying in 1500 BCE, so we're talking, gosh, 16,000 years plus before that. The earliest mention of the Babylonian gods. So either he would be saying that God appeared to two different people, that he appeared to somebody else first, who recorded the texts that are mentioned in the 7th century copy of the Enuma Elish that we found, or he's saying that it's like a brutal cycle, or maybe it's like I said in my opening statement, and it's that society's attempt at creating an identity for themselves, at taking what they know or what they thought they know about how our cosmos works and how our universe works, and applying that, adding in their own theology to further give them credibility in holding that belief, give them justification for holding it, and say, look, this is how the world works, and this God did it. and it was a way of closing the gaps in our understanding. And I think that Kent would agree with me that as time has gone on, as time has gone on, we can see clearly in the history of religion how the gaps in our understanding of the universe close, and also paralleled with that in an equal ratio, we also see a decline in the definition of God, of who God is. God's powers are limited more and more with the more that we understand how our universe works and why we're here. How much time do I have left?
You've got 2 minutes, 15 seconds.
Okay, and I want to address Kent's claim of kinds. You know, I've seen Kent make this claim several times. It's something that truly bothers me because for one, there's no evidence that we come from kinds, but the way that Kent describes kinds, you know, things being produced from, you know, something else, and I believe that he accepts the evidence for natural selection and for deviations in physiology as due to extreme pressures from environments. But there's no scientific evidence that everything evolves from a certain kind. I believe what you're trying to use is the scientific term speciation, which I would agree with you there with speciation. But eventually, you through speciation, you get an animal that can no longer reproduce with its original form, with whatever it came from, and then you have to explain, you know, well, why is that? If they are of the same kind, then why can't they reproduce? Maybe it's something entropic. Maybe that's what you're trying to claim. I don't know. I'll wait for that. With that being said, I will concede the rest of my time. I just want to also ask again for that prima facie evidence, or for you to clarify on what you meant by that. Thank you.
Okay, so you had 40 seconds left. Okay, Dr. Hovind, you got 5 minutes to rebut.
And then, okay, go ahead. I just want to make sure Dr. Hovind was unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, let's see, several things. I would say Moses did not copy from the Babylonians. The Babylonians probably had a twisted version of an original story handed down from Grandpa, and Moses had the right one. So you haven't demonstrated that you proved that he copied it, even though he wrote it later. If any cop will tell you, you can go to an accident scene, you get 5 witnesses. The first one may or may not be correct, the first one to tell the story. So you asked about kinds. The Bible says very clearly 10 times in the first chapter, they will bring forth after their kind. And 10 more times in the flood story. Variations certainly happen, as you mentioned, but they have severe limits. Anybody knows that. Farmers breed for bigger pigs all the time, but they're never going to get a pig as big as Texas. There are limits. Roaches become resistant to pesticides. They will never become resistant to a sledgehammer. There are limits to the variations. I do not believe kinds equals species. I don't think our modern classification system by Carolus Linnaeus has anything to do with biblical kinds. It may or may not match in some places with species. It may match with genus. It may match with family. But the kind is clear. These are the same kind of animal. They're tigers, okay? Animals always produce the same kind. That's not evolution. The information for that variety has to already be in the gene code. New information is never added. Dogs don't become pink or learn to fly because of the variations. They're still dog. And the gene pool of the new variety is always more limited and generally less likely to survive. That Chihuahuas cannot produce Great Danes, but Chihuahuas and Great Danes came from a common ancestor. And Chihuahuas wouldn't last in the real world, okay? There are varieties of corn, hundreds of varieties of corn. Where I grew up in Illinois, they got them all numbered when you drive down the cornfield. But they're still corn. Some have sweeter taste, some have more disease resistant, some grow in drier soil, wetter soil. It's still corn. You're never going to get a whale, a hamster, or a tomato to grow on your corn stalk. There are varieties of ear shapes and nose shapes in the world. No question, they're still an ear. All kinds of varieties of eyes, varieties of foot shapes. There's still a foot. How many varieties of human hands are there? Quite a few. Varieties of human lips. There's still a lip. 339 recognized breeds of dogs, but they're still a dog. So that is not evidence for evolution at all. The Bible says they will always bring forth after their kind. And the topic of this debate is there evidence for biblical creation? The biblical account says they're going to bring forth after their kind. That's all we've ever observed. So in a court of law, the judge would have to say, yep, there is evidence that animals always bring forth after their kind. There may be ring species. You go around Grand Canyon and get the Kaibab squirrel and the Abert squirrel. They're still a squirrel. Still a squirrel. No exceptions. You may get animals that are isolated, genetically isolated for a while, and they develop unusual traits. Nature selected that trait to survive, like the wolves survive better up in Alaska, and the dingoes survive better in Australia, where it's hot. They're still dog. They have miniature horses, little bitty horses, and big horses today, but they're still a horse. Horses, zebras, and donkeys, and may have come from a common ancestor. I don't know, but they're still obviously, to a third grader, they're still obviously the same kind of animal. But you guys, because we cannot define exactly where the word kind is in every situation, I think that would be a valuable field of research, But therefore, because the exact definition can't be given, that's supposed to prove that horses are related to mosquitoes, which is what you guys teach. Just because we can't name is a zebra and a quagga the same kind, probably, I don't know. But see, I'm not demanding that my theory be taught in the school system. You guys are demanding that your religion of evolution be taught in the school system, so the burden of proof's on you, not me. I think a tiger and a lion may be the same biblical original kind. They can no longer reproduce, but they originally could. They could bring forth after their kind. There's hundreds of varieties of cows, and we go through this in my seminar, part 4.
1 minute.
Sure. 300 varieties, I don't know how many varieties of chickens there are. You mentioned about that in the opening before we went on camera. Yeah, there's a lot of chickens, and they might have had a common ancestor called a chicken. There are 8 varieties of bears in the world. They might have had a common ancestor. It would have been a bear. This is not proof that bears are related to mosquitoes and tomatoes. I don't understand how anybody with half a brain can believe bears and mosquitoes are related if they draw lines on paper back to a common ancestor. The line on paper is not evidence. The Bible says they will bring forth after their kind. And I think that's all we've ever observed. That's all we have scientific evidence for. So I think I won the debate. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Well, that concludes the rebuttal period. Now we have a 25-minute discussion period coming up. So let me set my timer for that. And the two of you can have open discussion about the subject. What's the evidence for biblical creation? So I'm going to start the timer. 25 minutes for discussion. Have at it.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Do you mind if I go first?
Please do.
Great. So I want to correct something that you made in your claim. Tigers and lions can reproduce. It's known as ligers, or they're called tigans or tigans, I believe.
Tigons or ligers. Depends which one is the male. Right.
Correct. And in fact, there has been evidence, I believe, of a female liger reproducing with a male lion or a male tiger. That may be wrong. But so I guess I would have to see what that taxonomy looks like, because whenever you say kinds, that's very vague, and I heard a lot of mites in there. So I mean, do you have a working taxonomy that fits with the model of the known species in the world?
Well, I don't think anybody would argue a tiger and a lion are both in the cat family.
Sure, I agree.
Have retractable claws. Dogs don't have retractable claws. Cats do. I think all cats do. I don't know.
Yes,
but
I believe so.
To look at this tiger and lion situation and say they can reproduce. Okay, they may be divergent from an original created kind that was somewhere between the two. I don't know how many kinds of cats God made in the Garden of Eden. Doesn't matter to me. There might have been 50 varieties of birds that he made, and they've now diversified into thousands of varieties of birds. They're still bird, or in this case, they're still cat. Lion, tiger, and jaguar, and leopards are still the same kind of animal, a cat.
But in Genesis, when it's talking about the kinds, it actually lists different birds as after their kind. Is he talking about birds in general, or those specific types of birds? Like, I know you have an argument about the woodpecker. Do you believe that the woodpecker is a kind all of its own?
I don't know how many varieties of woodpeckers there are. Quite a few, actually, varieties of woodpeckers. There's the red-headed woodpecker.
Sure.
I'm not an expert on birds, but let's assume, pick a number and say God created 50 kinds of birds.
Okay.
I don't think woodpeckers are ancestral, have an ancestor common with eagles or hummingbirds. That would just be a guess on my part. This is called baraminology. There's a website, baraminology.com. Baramin is the Hebrew word for kind. Baraminology.com is a group of folks trying to solve exactly this. How many kinds of animals did Noah take on the ark?
So,
Of course, Noah was not required to take insects or fish, only animals on land in whose nostrils was the breath of life. But their current guess is about 8,000 kinds of animals had to go onto the ark. This would exclude anything in the water, because they have plenty of water outside. So how many kinds of bird? Is a woodpecker the same kind as an eagle? I'd say probably not. But
Sure.
keep in mind, I am not asking my theory to be taught in school at taxpayer expense. You guys who believe woodpeckers and mosquitoes and tomatoes are related, you believe a woodpecker is related to a tomato, don't you? If you go back far enough.
I believe that there are DNA similarities. I wouldn't say that they're related necessarily. I think that would be a gross misrepresentation of what relation is.
If I can show you a chart from the textbooks, and there are thousands of them, showing birds and mosquitoes and tomatoes going back with lines to a common ancestor that was single-celled. That is what the books teach. I think you have to admit that. So at least the textbooks teach birds, mosquitoes, and tomatoes have a common ancestor. Somewhere way back there, long ago and far away. That's not science. That's nonsense.
So looking at your claim, you're talking about woodpeckers and eagles and storks, and we can name a variety of birds that can't necessarily interbreed and that are very much different. Flamingos,
Sure.
ostriches. Prima facie, looking at a hummingbird, looking at an eagle, looking at a hawk, looking at them all side by side, prima facie, without any text, whether it be a textbook or a Bible, wouldn't you agree that they likely have a common ancestry?
No. The fact that there are similarities, i.e. they have feathers, just birds that have feathers, there are at least two basic types, those that can fly and those that can't.
Sure, I'm referring to more like bone structure.
Sure.
I mean, when you take like an eagle and a hummingbird, for example, the hummingbird has a longer beak for accessing nectar,
Right.
and the eagle, it has talons and a sharp beak for ripping apart its prey. But you take away the feathers, you take away the meat, and you just look at the bones and the bone structures, and there's an incredible amount of similarities there. So did God create different kinds that looked alike?
Well, I think if you look at all the cars built by General Motors or say Chevrolet,
Sure.
and if you take away the paint, take away the body, take away the electrical, I think you find the frame of many of them is probably identical.
Right.
There are some that come down the line and they use the exact same frame to build a 2-door or a 4-door or a hatchback. That's proof of a common designer. That's an engineering feat, not ancestral. So somebody engineered it where the same frame can supply, 2-door, 4-door, hatchback, pickup maybe. So
Could an intelligent designer not have created simple organisms that would have been able to evolve a frame, so to speak, that evolved into different hatchbacks or sedans or coupes or whatever?
Well, there's no evidence of any animal changing to anything other kind. So that would be, there's no evidence of it.
There's millions of transitional fossils, but I mean, I really don't want to get into evolution. I would rather stay on the creation claim in Genesis.
I think the creator of the kinds gave us overwhelming evidence that it had to be created. He used the same frame for the birds. Generally, they have a similar shoulder joint and hip joint, okay? But he used a completely different idea for insects. They have the skeleton on the outside, exoskeleton. And so he gave it so that there's so much evidence that you'd have to be a fool to not see there's a designer here. He can design animals that can live with the skeleton on the outside or skeleton on the inside. Are there cars that have the frame on the outside, like a unibody? Well, yeah, actually there are. But again, That's a design, an engineering feat, not ancestral.
Well, I'll agree with you that it's a design feat and that it suits a purpose. Like, for example, a roll cage in NASCAR, it has a purpose. It's not in every car, but it's in NASCAR because if the car flips, you want to protect the driver. And right. I mean, all I'm seeing in exoskeletons and things of that nature, things used for both defense and offense, are just attributes that are attained through the pressures of their environment that they change and adapt to.
So you think the exoskeleton came as a result of pressures from the environment? In other words, the insect developed this to prevent himself from being eaten. defense.
I'm not saying that that's why it prevented it, but I'm saying that the ones who did produce it, who did have an exoskeleton, that they were the ones who were more suitable to survive within their environment.
And you realize, of course, what you're stating is not based on evidence. It's based on a theoretical belief that there's nobody's ever seen any animal start to gradually produce an exoskeleton.
Well, sure. And we've never seen a star born. We've never seen a star's life cycle, but we have looked at multiple stars, and we have seen multiple stages of growth and death within stars that we have been able to make an amalgamation and a better understanding of the life cycle of the star, even though we haven't observed the full life cycle of a star with the human eye.
Well, you're starting with your religious belief that stars do indeed go through a cycle and are born and die. I think
that's not a religious belief, Kent.
I think it is. Okay. Suppose I had a belief that cars came from slowly evolved. I could show you evidence that there are one-wheeled vehicles out there called unicycles. I could show you evidence that there are two-wheeled vehicles, bicycles, motorcycles. I could show you and bring in physical evidence there are three-wheeled vehicles. I could actually arrange them in order: one-wheel, two-wheel, three-wheel, four-wheeler. Does that prove that's how it happened? No, not at all.
Not.
And you guys arranging these things in order that you already think it happened, that's where the problem is. You're doing exactly like I would be, but if I arranged the vehicles in order from 1, 2, 3, 4 wheel. That's not science.
If you group them by the wheel, but you are grouping them by kinds, and that is not science, because there's no scientific evidence to support your claim of kinds.
There is overwhelming scientific observable evidence that dogs produce dogs, and that's it. Never an exception.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And the evolutionary model actually supports that. You don't see a non-dog coming from a dog in the evolutionary model, unless you're speaking in extreme hyperbole. Unless you're speaking in hyperbole.
Think what you just said. Dogs will always produce dogs. However, going back in time, which we cannot do, but if you could go back in time, the dog came from an amoeba or a single-cell creature, which was certainly a non-dog. So somewhere along the line, the amoeba produced a non-amoeba, and the amoeba, you think, turned into both a dog and a mosquito, because you have lines on paper connecting them. Then somewhere, even though today mosquitoes only produce mosquitoes and dogs only produce dogs, you in your imagination think dogs and mosquitoes are related, so it had to come from something that was non-amoeba or bacteria. So why could it could happen in the past, but it can't happen today? So we can't observe it, or it's not science.
So we don't see a non-dog coming from a dog. We don't see a dog coming from a non-dog. And you say there's no reason to believe that, because we can't go back in time to observe that. So what I want to know is why you feel so confident in the claim that men came from mud and the breath of a deity, when you can't go back and there's no evidence that we came from mud. There's no scientific evidence to support that.
Well, General Motors makes all their cars out of natural components that come right out of the ground. They take iron ore, melt it down, make the iron. They add a little nickel or other elements to it, depending on what kind of steel they want. So you could argue that a car is made of 100% natural components, but it had a designer to do it. The mud didn't turn itself into a car, but they took the elements out of the dirt or the mud or the rock. So to say that...
How do you know that?
Well, we know it because we observe it. We did not observe God creating man.
We've never observed man coming from mud. Never.
No, we do observe cars coming from natural components. We can observe them digging out the iron ore, melting it down, making the iron, forging it into shape. Every step of a car production can be observed. We do not observe God making man from the mud. I agree. That's why it's a belief. You do not observe a mosquito and a dog coming from a common ancestor. That's why it's a belief. But it's taught in the textbooks, and we're all paying for that religion to be taught. This one says animals, fungi, and plants have a commman ancestor. But that's not science. That's
but automobiles do not reproduce that's a fallacy, I believe. I mean, because we're not talking about something that can reproduce. We're talking about something that does have a designer, but it's designed to suit a purpose. It's designed to suit a need to fill a slot, so to speak. And your creation account is nothing more than that. It is a creation, a design to fill a spot, and that spot is solidifying the identity of ancient Israelites, of ancient Canaanites, of ancient Babylonians, depending on which creation myth that you want to read.
Well, sure, you can believe that. This is straight from one of the textbooks used today. it says animals, fungi, and plants have a common ancestor. Do you believe fungus and elephants and tomatoes are related, have a common ancestor? That's what we're all paying for this to go in the textbooks.
So when you say believe, do I just believe that? No, but do I accept that other people have done the research, and do I accept the evidence? Then yes, I do. And I would like to add that I find it much more plausible than to say that God did it, and he created us from mud, and that plants lived for an entire day in sub-zero temperatures without a sun.
Well, like you brought up several topics that need to be addressed there, but you guys keep wanting to use the word accept. You accept evolution. You have to believe evolution. You guys keep trying to sneak that in. You have to accept truth. You do not have to, but you have to believe that mosquitoes are related. This textbook,
you can believe it, but there's evidence for that belief. There's justification to believe that.
Okay, I think there's evidence to prove dogs always produce dogs and cows always produce cows. That's where the evidence lies.
Do you believe there's evidence that man was created from mud?
No, I think we're made out of natural elements. I think you could find all the elements for man's body in the mud.
So you're interpreting that part allegorically because it doesn't suit your narrative.
I'm saying there is a narrative. There's a book that says God did it. I don't know of a better answer, but I'm not
and you're interpreting part of it literally and part of it allegorically to fix whatever gaps you have in your understanding.
Well, no, you guys are one of the ones with all the gaps in the understanding. We observe cows produce cows, dogs produce dogs.
That's okay. It's okay to have gaps, Ken.
Well, then call it. Then stop saying you accept it. Admit you believe it. It's a belief. It's a religion on your part.
Okay, I believe it, but I have justification for my belief.
I have justification for my belief. Nobody's ever seen a cow produce a non-cow. Therefore, somebody must have made the original cow.
You do have justification for your own belief, for your belief, but your belief itself does not have justification to be believed by anybody who would, other than people who would just accept it on faith.
Well, I think you need to look in the mirror. Jim, you're the one who has a belief that is not based on any scientific evidence. This textbook shows all the bats in the world are related to the horses and are related to the mice. They put them all together to draw. What they draw lines on paper is all they do. On the outside
no,
of the
that's
circle,
not what they do, Kent. No, the current working evolutionary model has been used for many things, from developing antibiotics to discovering how bacteria works. The current evolutionary model works every day in laboratories, and we make new discoveries because we operate under the assumption that we evolve.
Well, the same laboratories could use the assumption that, wow, a designer made these creatures out of the same 92 elements out of the ground. Maybe there are antibiotics that can be used because they have a common ancestor, common designer.
And we'd be wasting our time because scientists would be trying to figure out what kind of mud God used and what his breath contained, what the atmospheric contents of his breath were. And that's absurd because there's no need to go to that when there's already a working model. Now, if you want to debunk the working model and you want to show inconsistencies, then I would encourage you to accept your Nobel Prize.
Well, I think if you went to North Korea, you would not find any opposition to the idea of communism.
Sure.
I think anybody
who
opposes
actually, I disagree. If you go into the individual homes that are being oppressed, I'm sure that there would be some.
If anyone dares to speak out against communism, they end up, executed or down the bottom of the Pacific Ocean someplace.
Right. Excommunicated for heresy, so to speak.
I think we have a very similar, not quite as severe, but same thing with those who oppose evolution in the academic circles. It wasn't this way 200 years ago. But evolution religion has slowly taken over our school system, where now if you dare to oppose it, you don't get published, you don't get promoted, you actually get fired. Watch the movie Expelled to see those who say, look, I don't think evolution works. They'll get fired from their job.
Sure, because we're talking about the separation of church and state. People who make these assumptions under theological presuppositions do not need to be teaching in the public school system. They do not need to be funded by our government, which clearly states that there needs to be a separation between theology and government.
Thank you. I would point out those who believe mosquitoes and tomatoes are related, regardless of how much time you want to give them, should not be allowed to teach that to children.
I don't believe that people should be allowed to teach anything that cannot be demonstrated. I don't believe people should be allowed to teach anything that there's not evidence to believe that, such as God created man and then later created woman from his side. I think it's totally absurd. And again, there's no evidence that women were made from man. I mean, we can go into the different creation accounts. We can go into authorship and everything like that. I don't think it's necessary. But I do encourage you to read the difference in accounts as far as to when God made woman between the account in Genesis 1 and the account in Genesis 2.
Yeah, I could not prove scientifically that woman was made from a rib from man. I think we could show that there are obvious structural similarities, and digestive tract is about identical, and there are thousands of identical systems between men and women. Praise God for the differences too, but there are obviously some similarities. Again, I would say that may be an indication of a common designer, just like the Ford, just like the two-door and the four-door and the hatchback have same frame, same electrical system, same paint job. It doesn't prove common ancestors. You just said
that you had evidence that women was created from a rib. Can you
I cannot prove that. I can't prove that scientifically. That's what the text says. Oh, but by the way, you can't disprove that either.
Well, I mean, I can't disprove that women wasn't made by scrunching up some silk and wrapping it in duct tape.
That's not what the text says. The text says the woman was made from man's rib. The purpose of this debate is the evidence of the biblical creation. Do you have any evidence to counter that? Forget the duct tape. The Bible says Eve was made from a rib. By the way, there's only one bone in the human body that'll grow back if you take it out, and that's your rib.
Well, I would like to clarify, to point out that you said that there is no evidence that a woman was created from a rib. So I'm sure you've heard this saying, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So there's no reason for me to try to disprove it, because you haven't in any way proved that women came from a rib.
Okay, that which has no evidence can be dismissed. There is no evidence a dog came from anything other than a dog. Not going forward.
Yes, there is.
Produce dogs in the future. You think in the past a dog came from a non-dog. There's no evidence of a dog ever coming from a non-dog. We can dismiss the whole evolution theory. There is no evidence of any dog coming from a non-dog in the past.
There's no evidence of the 6,000-year-old Earth, Ken.
That's what you're changing topics here. You're diverging, okay?
No, I'm talking about claims versus evidence for the claims. And I would argue that I have much more evidence. Now, while it's not complete, while it is, yes, it is a theory, but it is a working theory. There is truth within the theory. If anything in there conflicts with what we know to be true, then it's thrown out. It's no longer considered a theory, Kent, like gravity.
Hey. Well, then throw it out, because we've only seen dogs produce dogs, and you think dogs and mosquitoes have a common ancestor. Throw that theory out, son. That's not science.
Yeah, there is genetical information. There's genetical data that ties us all together. Do you deny that?
We don't. Well, that could be a common design. I think the Fords and the Chevys are both made out of steel. Comes on from the same dirt. Doesn't prove they're
yes, and they're also not living beings. So I think that's a false representation.
Well, you're giving a false representation, saying, "Wow, look, we don't see dogs always produce dogs in the future, but in the past, you think it was different." That's not science. That's a religion. You believe dogs came from something single-celled. You believe that single-celled creature produced something that was ultimately turned into a dog. This is a religious belief, Jim. This is not science. And I wish you guys would.
And what do you believe? What do you believe? Where do you believe the animals came from? Where do you believe man came from?
I don't see any other option than to say there must be a designer that made this. If I walked into a town that was deserted out west, John Wayne, a deserted desert town, a cowboy town, I look at these buildings, say, wow, there's nobody here, but I think somebody built these buildings. I could walk into a town, I could find an arrowhead and say, I think somebody made this. I don't know who, I don't know when, but somebody made it. I think you can look at a mosquito under a microscope and say, wow, this has amazing design, digestive system. It can fly, for heaven's sake. That's complicated. It can reproduce. You talk about a complicated system. Reproduction is mind-bogglingly complex in all the things that have to happen just right. Any system, the eyes, of the smelling system is so complex, I would say it's logical to say there's a designer. Now, who is that designer? Is it Allah, Buddha, Jehovah? That becomes a different set of arguments. But to get over hurdle number one, somebody designed the mosquito.
Okay, so you believe that this was all designed and it was done by a creator, and it is centered around us, I believe. I believe that you believe that humans and the God of the Bible have a unique connection, correct?
Oh, yeah, I believe there's three different kinds of life. I think
if that is the case, then why is it that out of all, my apologies, out of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, humans can only see less than 0.004 of it? It's like 0.0035% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum.
Right.
Humans, for example, in wavelength reception, Humans can only recept somewhere between 380 to 740 nanometers. But you have beings like the mantis shrimp, who I don't believe are hoping for salvation, or that they were created for any divine purpose, and yet their wavelength reception is much better than ours, 300 to 720, so a much wider range of wavelength reception. So there's so much that is created that is not for us. In Genesis 1, it tells us that these stars were made to be signs for planting crops and signs for recognizing the changes of the seasons. And some would argue that it's the zodiac. But
2 minutes, gentlemen.
They were created for that reason, yet we know for a fact that there are stars in our universe that not only have we not seen with the naked eye, but we will probably never see.
And how do you know that for a fact?
Well, are you familiar with the term of the universe horizon, or the horizon effect?
Yes, I understand. I believe you're probably true, but you don't know that that's correct. I'm just pointing out this is a belief. I believe the same thing.
Okay, yes, I don't know in an epistemological sense, as in it hasn't been demonstrated to be completely true. Like I'm not holding it in my hands. You're right. There is no conclusive study. But at the same time, I have justification to believe that, and there's no reason for me to say, well, God created these stars for humans, and well, this has to be all there is because the Bible says so.
Okay, I have justification. If I walk into a deserted cowboy town out west, I would have justification for believing somebody made this. Even though
and you can find out who. You can find out who through archaeology. You can find out through experimenting from the past, from testing.
Okay, let's allow Dr. Hovind just to have equal time with response there. Go ahead, Dr. Hovind. Finish your sentence.
The buildings in this cowboy town are made out of wood and probably nails, which are made from iron. Those are natural components. We can see trees growing all over, but we never see wood cut into those shapes and nailed together in that way. It would be logical to say somebody built this building or made this town, laid it out in a street down the middle, and buildings on the side. Maybe there's a reason for that, traffic flow. I think we can study the human body or the body of a mosquito or a star and say there's a reason for this. If you'd rather be a mantis shrimp to get their eyes, that's up to you. Go ahead and swap eyes if you'd like. But I think maybe a reason we see a small part of the spectrum is that God's got a big surprise for us when we go to heaven. Hey, guys, new eyes, you can see the whole thing. You can now see the sounds. Whoa, that'll be cool. I don't know, but I'm looking forward to going there. I would like you to come too, Jim. Would you like to come?
It would be cool, Kent. I do not disagree with you. It would be cool to go to an afterlife where I don't hurt anymore, where my senses are enhanced, where I didn't have to worry about anything, where I could see my loved ones, I could meet my family. I could experience all this peace. But
that's time, gentlemen.
But
it's available.
There's no evidence to suggest that is true.
It is true. I've got it already.
Okay, so now, gentlemen, we have 4-minute closings, and so Jim started first, so he does his closing first, and so let me reset my timer for 4 minutes. It's not responding too well. Here we go. Okay, Jim, 4 minutes when you start speaking.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to point out that, as usual, Kent has not given evidence for his claim. He's only given evidence against other claims. And to me, that is very disingenuous, especially whenever he claims to have a belief and he claims to have a monopoly on the truth. Not just a truth, but the truth. And again, I would ask the question, why did God create stars that his creation would never see? Why did God create colors that his creation would never see? Not just any creation, though, but his special creation. God saw that it was very good. This was something that was special to God. God created humans for a reason, and the early understanding in the ancient Near East was that the creators made this God for us to experience, for us to enjoy. Yet we have a light and a heat source that gives us cancer. We have plants that poison us. We have viruses and bacteria and molds and things that contaminate our bodies and kill us. We have so many illnesses that take children not only in the womb but at early ages for apparently no reason. And for Kent to say that there is a reason that we were created, he would have to also say that there is a reason for all of these horrible things that we experience that are supposedly products of a creator, yet do his creation no good. I will say again that I don't need evolution to disprove creation, and neither does anybody else. Creation can be disproven all on its own, and people like Kent Hovind have set up a false dichotomy to where it's one or the other. And that's just not the case, because he's leaving out things like Marduk and Tiamat, and how Tiamat's body was carved into half and was made into the firmament. He's denying these obvious parallels to theology and claiming that his is true solely because he has so much invested in it. I thank everybody for listening and for watching. Thank you, Kent, for showing up. Thank you, Standing for Truth, for having me. Nephilim Free, thank you for moderating. I had a really great time.
You got a minute and 40 seconds.
A minute and 40 seconds. I can sing a little ditty, maybe. No, I think that's okay. I'll let Kent close.
Okay, then I'll reset the timer for Kent for 4 minutes when you start speaking, Kent.
Well, okay. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for doing this. I know it's got to be difficult to try to defend the idea that we all came from a rock for no reason, and the idea that we go nowhere when it's over with. I would love to have you have the peace and assurance that you can indeed know. As far as why there are colors we cannot see, there are two options, I think, obvious from the creation viewpoint. A, maybe originally they could, and they lost it due to their sin. Or maybe someday we will gain it again, or maybe both are true. So it is interesting to contemplate the idea that maybe the whole electromagnetic spectrum was created for us, and right now we get just a limited part of it, okay? Is there evidence for biblical creation? Yes, I think there's overwhelming evidence. There had to be a creator, like walking into the cowboy town or finding an arrowhead. Somebody made this. Now, finding out who and why and when is a different story, but first hurdle you've got to get over, Jim, there's a God, and it's not you, and it's not Charlie Darwin, and it's not a religious theory like evolution. We never see any plant or animal produce anything other than what is obviously the same kind, and that's a common use word, a kind. Is a Chevy and a Ford pickup truck the same kind of vehicle? Yeah. Okay, anyway, Bible says in Romans chapter 1, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest. You could know. You could find an arrowhead and say, somebody made this. Unless you wanted to believe it happened by erosion or exfoliation or thermal expansion of the rock. But no, somebody made it. If you find a building, a Western town, somebody made it. Period. It's end of story. It's common sense. When you look at under a microscope and see a cell, you say, somebody made this. This is amazing design. One cell is more complicated than the space shuttle, most complex machine built by man that I'm aware of. God has showed it unto them. Next verse says, for the invisible things of him, God is invisible. Apparently, God is outside of time, space, matter, not affected by them. This is not 2019 in heaven. God's not even affected by time. Anyway, the invisible things from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. I can look at things that are made. I can look at this Snapple bottle and say, wow, this guy, whoever made this, pretty smart. They put a label on there so I can tell what's on the inside without having to open it. They put a lid for it so it doesn't spill when you tip it over. Wow, it fits the human hand pretty good. I think this must have been designed by somebody who was thinking. Okay, not a problem. I can look at the plants and say, wow, I can eat that plant, and that plant provides vitamins that my body needs. How did the plant get stuff that I need? I could say, wow, somebody must have designed the food to be eaten by humans. They glorified him not as God, it says in verse 21, neither were thankful. Jim, you haven't glorified God for his creation. I think you should. They became vain in their imagination, and their foolish heart was darkened. I think it is foolish to believe that a mosquito and a dog have a common ancestor. I think that's foolish.
1 minute.
Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. What has happened in the last 150 years? This crazy religion of evolution has taken over our school system and our government, just like the crazy system of communism has taken over quite a few countries, and the crazy teachings of Islam has taken over some countries. And if you dare to stand up and oppose Islam in a Muslim country, they'll cut your head off. If you dare to stand up and oppose communism in a communist country, you'll be in Siberia. If you dare to stand up and oppose evolution in our public school system, you'll be in academic Siberia. And praise God, they don't pay my salary. I'm not afraid of them. I'm not frightened by them at all. And I'll do 1,000 of these debates if I have to. I'll do one every day. The Bible has never been disproven. Is there scientific evidence for their creator? Well, is there scientific evidence an arrowhead was man-made? Yeah. I think it's intuitive. Somebody made it. I think the creation account is intuitive. Somebody made it. You're going to stand before him, Jim. Come on, do a credential, and I'll give you I'll introduce you to Jesus.
That's time. All right, so that concludes the closing statements. Now, let me ask, standing for truth, are you there, brother? Are we going to have a question and answer session, or is this going to conclude the debate?
No, it looks like we just reached the hour mark. I've got two questions that I can ask really quick. Thanks for the lively debate, guys. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Dr. Hovind, for doing this. It was very fun, very profitable. First question that I have for Dr. Hovind. What is the best evidence for a 6,000-year-old Earth? Go ahead.
Well, I had a debate on this very topic a couple days ago, and it's all up on our YouTube channel, Kent Hovind Official. That was the title of the debate. What's the best evidence for 6,000? The Bible clearly teaches about 6,000. Just add up the dates. So we have documentary evidence that is 6,000 years old. Just like I could find documentary evidence that the property I live on was occupied by humans for the last 300 years. I could probably go back in the county records and find, oh, there was a house here by a farmer here 150 years ago. Oh, okay. We find a few bricks up at the top on the North 40. There's some physical evidence that there used to be a house up there. Okay. Now, there is documentary evidence. The Bible is certainly a document, and it clearly teaches about 6,000. As far as scientific evidence, I think there's overwhelming scientific evidence the Earth and Moon and the whole system cannot be billions. I'm not aware of any that shows clearly 6,000 from the scientific, but I'm aware of some scientific evidence that shows clearly it can't be 4.5 billion, way less than probably a few million. The population of the Earth, the cooling down of the Earth, the slowing spin of the Earth, the recession of the Moon. I covered all that in the last debate up on Kent Hovind Official. Is there evidence for the Earth being 6,000 years old? Yes. The Bible clearly says 6,000, or it clearly indicates by adding up the dates, 6,000. That's a document that has never been disproven. So I'm going to stand on that one. Okay.
Okay, I appreciate that answer, Dr. Hovind. And then the other question would be for you, Jim. This one is from Caustic Soda. The question he asks is, numbers are objective. Every civilization that ever existed has always agreed 2 is a multiple of 1 thing. So is there an objective reality?
Yeah, so and it's a little bit of a controversial view that I have, so I'm probably going to get torn up for this, but I do believe that there is an objective reality in that, say, hate, for example. I can hate somebody. I have the potential, the ability to hate somebody, but I currently don't hate anybody right now, in case anybody is wondering. While I don't hate, it's not a part of my reality. It is part of my objective reality. So I believe that the objective reality is something that grows with experience, that grows with our knowledge, that grows with our exposure to new things and new information. So I believe that objective reality can be reached, but is never anything in the present. Does that make sense?
Awesome. Okay, well, I appreciate that response there, Jim. Guys, once again, great debate. Hopefully we can do it again sometime in the future. And everybody have a good day.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.